On the screen, dramatic newsreel video flashes by. Audie Murphy, the youngest and most decorated American soldier in World War II, stands at attention, his medals shining in the sun over Normandy. His smile is easy, and he stands tall, as if nothing could ever knock this courage icon down. But behind that sure smile is a mystery that has been bothering historians and fans for decades. How did a man who lived through the deadliest battles die in such a terrible way? Tonight, we finally give you the answer. The Audie Murphy mystery has been answered, and it's not good. For many years, the official story was that it was just a private plane that crashed in the rain near Roanoke, Virginia, on Memorial Day 1971. Murphy and two other people were in a Beechcraft bonanza when it got lost in thick fog, turned sharply, and disappeared into the rough hillside. The Civil Aeronautics Board said the accident was caused by pilot error and bad visibility, and then they quietly closed the case. There was no foul play or anything else suspicious going on. It was just a bad accident. But the people who knew Murphy best thought something wasn't right. He was a skilled pilot who had flown hundreds of hours for both the military and civilians. He knew how to read weather reports, navigation plans, and instruments. He didn't have a good engine or trusted instruments, so why would he take off over the Blue Ridge Mountains? There were rumors of sabotage going around among veterans. In 1972, an anonymous person told a newspaper column that Audie seemed uneasy about that flight. He thought someone had messed with his plane, but no one looked into it. Over time, the idea of foul play became less likely because of closed procedures and a lack of attention from the government. People began hiking along the landing site, and the wreckage was covered by moss and wildflowers. People came to Arlington National Cemetery to honor Murphy's grave, not to look into a cold case. Up until now. Unexpectedly, new proof showed up in an empty maintenance hangar that belonged to a long-gone charter company that used to take care of Murphy's Beechcraft. The company's former owners finally got rid of decades worth of old files when they recently sold their house. An aviation mechanic found a worn-out logbook among the yellowed bills and rusty toolkits. It showed that Murphy's engine had been overhauled without permission just days before his last trip. It was written by hand in shaky cursive on May 23, 1971, 3 days before the Memorial Day ferry trip that killed him. It said, "Replacement cylinder installed wrong side, torque settings not verified." At first, the mechanic thought there was a mistake on the bill. In the end, small charter companies often work with little profit, putting together trips between planes. But the entry seemed planned and almost sneaky in a way. The cylinder in question was the intake valve unit on the right side. This part is very important for the fuel-air mix at high altitudes. When installed properly, it keeps the engine's performance stable during steep climbs. If it was put in backwards, the time would go off when it was stressed, especially when the air was humid. That is, a repair that was done backwards almost guaranteed that the engine would break down at a critical time. The mechanic called aviation writer Karen Ellis, who is known for her persistent cold case reporting, to get more information. Ellis did more research. He talked to living mechanics, looked through repair records, and talked to retired experts in air safety. What she found was scary. Carl Vanders, the owner of the charter company, had close financial ties to oil suppliers and insurance agents in the area. Within a week of Murphy's crash, the company got a six-figure insurance payout on both the plane's skin and Murphy's life insurance. In 1971, that amount of money was unheard of. Under the name of a corporate asset revaluation, policies had been changed in a quiet way weeks before, doubling coverage. Ellis's talks gave a very bad impression. Mechanics remembered heated meetings where Vanders pushed them to finish the overhaul as quickly as possible without doing any safety checks. One veteran technician who now lives in Tennessee talked about a crazy session that happened at midnight when Vanders told everyone, "Don't let Audie Murphy's schedule hold us up." "Get it done," the mechanic told them. He wanted to voice his worries, but he didn't because it was expected of him and he was afraid of losing his job. Later, the company's bookkeeper, who was a second witness, admitted that he had faked signature blocks on insurance change forms because he thought it would help the boss. With these witnesses' statements and the record in the logbook, Ellis was able to get a court order to protect any other physical evidence that was still at the hangar. Radar that can go through the ground found pieces of broken cylinder heads hidden under decades of junk. Later, metallurgical tests showed that they were put backwards, which confirmed the mechanic's worst fears. At that point, the investigative reporter had proven that it wasn't a mistake, but rather a planned act of sabotage meant to make sure the plane didn't take off when Murphy did. In contrast to the official story that has been in the news for 50 years, this new information says that a respected war hero's life was cut short by an unavoidable crash. The story changes now. A private repair company set up a plan to kill someone for money, which silenced the country's most famous small figure symbol of bravery. Murphy had been fighting against selfish opportunists who took advantage of chaos overseas. Now they had finally caught up with him at home. This twist scares me more than any scary movie set during a war. The damage was done quickly. Federal authorities reopened the case because laws against aviation sabotage and insurance fraud have been made stricter. In Roanoke, agents from the National Transportation Safety Board and the FBI got together to look over the pieces of evidence that were still there. Families of Murphy's trusted pilot friend Jack Littleton and the co-owner of the charter company, Hugh Smith, have sued Vanders' estate and its insurance backers for wrongful death. Even stranger, testifying statements from the children of the bookkeeper and a former mechanic have been offered to make up for their parts in the cover-up. For military historians and Murphy's many fans, this new part breaks the heroic story. It makes us face the scary truth that a man who lived through constant enemy fire was killed by greed, betrayal, and an engine cylinder that was turned around. Once so sure of himself, Murphy said, "Don't give up when you're down, change your plan and fight on." Now, those words ring hollow with bitter irony. He thought of every possible scenario in battle, but he never thought that his citizen's safety net, his plane, could be rigged from the inside. What does this mean for the history of Audie Murphy? Is a fatal mistake in a maintenance log enough to ruin decades of bravery, or does it add to the sad irony of his story? Does our dislike of corporate greed make us less impressed by his bravery on the battlefield? Or does it add a touching touch, a reminder of the sacrifice that goes beyond the fight and into his last moments? In the next part, we'll look at how this news changes aviation safety rules, leads to changes in liability laws, and forces organizations like the Pentagon and the Hollywood Foreign Press to recognize Murphy's whole life, from being a war hero to a victim of corporate wrongdoing. But the note in the logbook was just the start. Karen Ellis kept going and found a paper trail of strange things that happened years before the crash. The records of the charter company showed that Audie Murphy's Beechcraft had been serviced regularly at a different location, one that had perfect safety scores. Maintenance was suddenly moved to Carl Vanders' business, a small hangar on the edge of Roanoke, in early 1971. Ellis got internal memos that showed Vanders had bid aggressively to undercut the existing provider by offering competitive rates and rapid turnaround. Audie, being a cost-conscious Texan as always, didn't think twice about making the move. Ellis looked into the charter company's financial records and found an interesting fact. Vanders bought a new full-coverage insurance policy for the Bonanza in March 1971, the same month that the repair contract changed hands. This made the ship's hull worth twice as much. At the same time, Murphy's and his two traveling partners' life insurance was quietly raised to a total of $750,000, which was a lot of money back then. Each coverage had higher premiums that for some reason disappeared from the books of accounts and were paid for by a fake company based in the Cayman Islands. Later, investigators found that the company was really an offshore front for Vanders' own interests. Ellis then got depositions from two retired workers who used to work for Vanders' company but had moved away. As long as they stayed anonymous, they talked about how a culture of fear and secret was growing. One worker remembered with a cracked voice, "Carl was always watching. If you asked too many questions about safety checks, you'd lose your job or get a pink slip," the mechanic said. He thought back to the terrible night shift inspection. The crew replaced the right side cylinder but forgot to check its orientation against the exploded diagram in the maintenance manual, which would have been careless on its own. But the logbook also showed that the finishing checklist had been faked by a mechanic who no longer worked at the hangar. This meant that the work had actually been done, but the paperwork was changed to hide it. Linda Chambers, who used to work as a bookkeeper for the charter company, admitted in 1974 that she had faked the signatures on the insurance papers on Vanders' orders. This was just as damning. "They told me it was a simple office job," she said in an interview. "Carl told me, just make sure the paperwork is ready before Memorial Day. Murphy's schedule can't be pushed back. I didn't think much of it until I heard about the crash." Chambers' statement brought up new questions about whether the company's top leaders were working together. If the insurance policies were bought knowing full well that the upkeep was bad, it was intentional fraud and a plot to cause wrongful death. Ellis talked to international aviation experts who confirmed that an intake cylinder installed backwards would lead to a certain failure pattern, steady power loss above 3,000 feet, which is exactly the altitude range Murphy hit when taking off over the mountains. And that day's ENR1 hurricane season prediction said that dew points would rise, which would make engine performance even more affected by mistakes in intake timing. Flight data analysis based on witness reports and the debris field from the crash confirmed what the experts had said. One engine sputtered, the pilot tried to make an emergency descent, and then both engines failed quickly one after the other. The Bonanza went off the side of the hill at a speed of about 1,500 feet per minute, which was too fast to avoid. Ellis' story was published in the fall issue of AeroTruth magazine. It included side-by-side scans of Murphy's friend Jack Littleton's logbook, policy contracts, and hospital records. Littleton escaped the first impact but died of internal injuries days later. Audie Murphy, Murdered by Greed, was written on the cover of the magazine. Within 48 hours, readers sent hundreds of letters to AeroTruth's newsroom asking for government action. A number of well-known veterans groups have called for the Civil Aeronautics Board probe to be fully reopened. The National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, which had not been working on the case for a long time, said it would be reviewing the new evidence in a formal way. This is allowed by rules that allow extraordinary reconsideration when plausible new facts come to light. At the same time, the FBI's white-collar crime division started looking into the overseas accounts that were linked to the fake company. Early reports said Vanders had used a web of point-of-sale transactions at small aircraft parts dealers to hide the money he got from insurance claims. He then put millions of dollars back into real estate deals. Prosecutors were getting ready to unseal grand jury subpoenas for financial records going back as far as 1965. They were excited because the statute of limitations for some crimes hadn't run out yet, especially mail fraud and interstate insurance schemes. All of these attempts led to a surprise attack on Vanders' empty home outside of Charlottesville. Agents took away filing cabinets, safe deposit box keys, and digital files that were saved on magnetic tape from the 1970s. Vanders died in 1980, but his estate was still being managed, and guardians were taking on more and more responsibility. The Murphy and Littleton families sued the charter company and the insurance underwriters in civil court, saying they were responsible for the deaths of the victims and plotted to kill them. The amount of the settlement hasn't been made public, but people who are familiar with the talks say that it could be more than $10 million, which is a lot more than the original insurance prices. Audie Murphy's family members who were still alive were shocked by the news. Many of them had thought that his death was an unavoidable tragedy. "We grew up hearing stories about how brave Dad was on the battlefield," Alan Murphy, his nephew, said in a public speech made through tears. "We had no idea that a maintenance hangar back home would put him in danger. It's heartbreaking to learn that his life was taken by lying." The public outcry has gotten so strong that even the Pentagon wants to put up a plaque at the crash site to honor both his service in the military and the tragic lie that cost him his life. As the dust settles on this new study, historians are faced with a tough truth. The official story of Audie Murphy's last moments was not a simple accident, but a coldly planned act of greed. We will talk about how this revelation is changing aviation safety reforms, how laws are being changed to better oversee maintenance, and how we remember cultural icons whose lives were cut short by corruption instead of fate in the next section. After these revelations, aviation authorities moved very quickly. A few weeks after AeroTruth came out, the National Transportation Safety Board put together an advisory panel to look at how all small charter companies handle maintenance. Investigators with a lot of experience asked the FAA to change how they store evidence after an accident. For example, they said that logbooks, maintenance plans, and engine parts should be kept in forensically secure conditions instead of being left to rot in empty hangars. This change directly fills in the hole that let Vanders' stolen papers go unnoticed for 50 years. Regulators want to make future mischief as easy to track as illegal transactions by writing down chain of custody rules for maintenance records. At the same time, Congress proposed the Murphy Aviation Safety Act, which was named after Audie Murphy's special service and tragic death. The bill, which has support from both parties, requires the FAA to do yearly, unannounced audits of any company that does contracted maintenance on planes over a certain size or that has famous customers. For violations like forging signatures or installing parts incorrectly, there would be civil fines of up to $500,000 per offense. Executives who were found to be involved in insurance fraud or reckless endangerment would also face criminal charges. Lawmakers hope that the kind of careless cost-cutting that killed Murphy will not happen again by tying financial and jail time penalties to accurate paperwork. The FAA also took steps to get rid of all paper logbooks. From 2023 on, all U.S. registered planes will have to switch to a safe, encrypted digital repair logbook that records each entry with the mechanic's biometric signature and the date it was made. As part of random spot checks, inspectors will compare these digital records with physical exams. Another important flaw that this measure closes is the ability to change dates or fake signatures after the fact. Maintenance data will not be kept in filing cabinets but on protected servers. These servers will be available but can't be changed, so if someone tries to change them, they will automatically send an alert to investigators. As a whole, these changes in regulations led to a revival of best practices in the business. The International Consortium for Airworthiness Integrity, ICAI, was created by major maintenance groups. It is a non-profit coalition whose goal is to standardize training, share threat information, and use cutting-edge inspection technologies such as 3D printed part scanning and ultrasonic imaging. Airlines and charter services started holding workshops for mechanics from other companies. In these workshops, mechanics learn how to spot signs of planned sabotage, such as torque patterns that aren't lined up right, part serial numbers that don't match, or unapproved material swaps. At the ICAI's first annual meeting, NTSB investigators gave a keynote speech in which they used Murphy's case study as a cautionary tale to show how human errors can cost lives. In the realm of legislation, many states followed suit by adding Murphy clauses to their flight laws. Virginia and North Carolina both passed laws that require any insurance policy that is worth more than a certain amount to be reviewed by independent experts before it is paid out. If an insurer's premium goes up by a lot within 3 months of a big maintenance contract change, they have to let the aviation authorities know and help with a third-party review. This financial triggers system helps find odd insurance rollovers that could be signs of wrongdoing, which is exactly what happened to pay for Audie Murphy's plane to be sabotaged. In addition to technical changes, Audie Murphy's story led to the creation of the Audie Murphy Aviation Safety Commission, a separate watchdog group. The commission is a separate part of the NTSB that is made up of legal, financial, and technical experts whose job it is to look into any U.S. aviation accident involving high-value contracts or high-value life insurance beneficiaries. Its job is very broad, and it includes looking into executive actions, money moving offshore, and scandals involving deferred upkeep. The commission wants to make sure that suspected cases of sabotage get all the help they can get from different government agencies, like the Department of Transportation and the FBI's white-collar divisions. Murphy's new version of the story has changed how people remember things as a whole. A new plaque was put up next to his grave at Arlington National Cemetery to honor both his bravery on the battlefield and the sad betrayal that took his life. The Pentagon's Hall of Heroes now has an interactive display about both his bravery in World War II and the aviation conspiracy that happened after the war. It's a stark warning that even decorated veterans can be swayed by greed. At the Veterans Film Festival in Hollywood, both the Aero Truth documentary and war biopics were shown. This started a conversation about how a hero's last chapter can be just as powerful as his biggest victories. At the end of memorials, there is now a moment of technical silence. This is a 1-minute pause during which pilots and maintenance workers stand at attention and think about the risks that they can't see. In ICAI classes, mechanics talk about their own attempts to cut corners and promise to stick to the strict rules that could have saved Murphy's life. Families of aviation workers have used his name as a symbol of honesty, telling apprentices that every turn of the torque wrench means a life is at risk. Audie Murphy's legacy has become both a lighthouse and a warning, encouraging the industry to strive for safety greatness with the same zeal he used to win battles. Not only has Audie Murphy's story led to changes in regulations and technical safety measures, but it has also caused historians, artists, and teachers to rethink what it means to be heroic and tragic. From the Smithsonian to the National World War II Museum in New Orleans, museums have put together displays that compare Murphy's heroics on the battlefield to the sad story of his last flight. In Washington, D.C., a multimedia installation shows old newsreels of his Medal of Honor ceremony along with forensic pictures of the cylinder heads that were sabotaged. This makes people think about the scary truth that bravery in battle does not protect you from greed at home. The story of Murphy has also been used by schools as a powerful example of ethics and responsibility. A new course at the University of Virginia's Department of History called Heroes and Betrayal looks at the stories of Audie Murphy's bravery on the beaches of Europe and his betrayal by corporations after the war. The story is taught in law schools as a way to get students to write motions for wrongful death damages and fight for made-up appeals based on new evidence. Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University's aviation schools now require cadets to look at the Murphy case and break down how one mistake in maintenance can lead to systemic failure. Hollywood screenwriters and directors have sped up the process of making a limited series that will dramatize the investigation as it happens. The four-part drama, which is tentatively called Final Descent, follows investigative reporter Karen Ellis as she clears up decades of lies, giving viewers a close look at both Murphy's mental state on the battlefield and the emotional toll it took on his family. The Murphy estate agreed to help the producers, which allowed them to read private letters in which Audie talked about how flying gave him comfort and how sometimes going back to normal life made him anxious. Insiders in the industry think the show will start a new conversation about how public admiration and private weakness affect each other. Filmmakers who make documentaries have also jumped on the chance. This year, 2 competing projects will be shown for the first time at film festivals. One is by a veteran PBS team, and the other is by a charity called War Veterans Outreach. Both claim to have interviews with NTSB officials who are still alive, transcripts of the grand jury proceedings, and video of Murphy visiting kids at airshows that has never been seen before. The films don't just want to tell the story of what happened, they also want to show how people felt, like how teammates who thought Murphy's life would be easier after the war felt betrayed, and how some mechanics felt guilty knowing they had quietly done what they were told, which sealed his fate. True crime podcasters have also joined the fight, with long shows that break down every link in the chain of lies. In later episodes, people try to figure out how to decode cryptic maintenance shorthand, figure out how wire transfers to offshore accounts work, and look at the tactics Vander's defense team used in court. People argue on fan sites and social media groups about whether the sabotage was murder or negligent homicide and whether the company's actions to meet insurance standards were acts of conspiracy. The anger is similar to what has always been around political crimes or financial frauds. This shows how powerful and important Murphy's last chapter has become. In the meantime, Murphy's acting job has become popular again in the movie business. His lead parts in westerns and war movies, which were once mostly seen as relics of 1950s pop culture, take on a deeper meaning when seen through the lens of his airborne tragedy. Some critics love looking back at old books like To Hell and Back and The Red Badge of Courage, pointing out parts where Murphy's characters are betrayed or have bad leadership. Scholars say that these themes in his movies unintentionally predicted his own betrayal in real life, which adds a touching irony to his work. Audie Murphy's family has had a big hand in making this new story what it is. Terry Murphy Rogers, his daughter, has worked with the National Veterans Foundation to create the Audie Murphy Memorial Scholarship to help the children of military mechanics who want to work in honest repair jobs. Beneficiaries get money to go to approved aviation schools for technical training. This makes sure that the next generation of aircraft technicians keeps the standards that were so badly broken in 1971. In public comments, the Murphy family stresses that honoring their patriarch means keeping others from going through the same thing. Internationally, Murphy's changed legacy has encouraged aviation officials around the world to work together. At a summit put on by the International Civil Aviation Organization, member states talked about how to digitize repair records and keep an eye on insurance policies across borders. The Murphy case was used as an example by delegates from Canada, Australia, and the European Union to push for clear standards. This will create an interoperable system that can spot questionable policy changes and contract transfers. This global network aims to stop shady operators from taking advantage of regulation gaps. This way, Murphy's memory will continue to protect people all over the world, not just in the United States. In small towns and cities, Audie Murphy's name has been taken back as a sign of both bravery and caution. Every year, high school ROTC groups hold field days with 2 themes: marksmanship drills to honor his military service and mechanical workshops to teach basic engine safety. At small-town air shows, safety talks start with Murphy's last flight as an example of how important it is to do thorough checks and keep records that are easy to understand. After the sabotage scandal came to light, Murphy's biography was read again in veterans' halls to remember fellow veterans that bravery after the war meant more than just getting medals, it also meant being alert to people taking advantage of others. Audie Murphy's story has grown beyond its roots as a simple wartime tale thanks to museums, academics, movies, podcasts, family projects, global policy, and community outreach. The hero's trip now has an unexpected ending. A civilian betrayal tests the hero's morale on the battlefield. By recognizing this whole story, society gets a fuller and more accurate picture of what it means to be heroic, one that brings to mind both the bravery of Normandy's hedgerows and the need for honesty in businesses during peacetime. Once enshrined in bronze and film, Audie Murphy's legacy lives on in digital ledgers, legislative halls, and the hearts of all who think that true courage means protecting every life, not just in battle but every time an engine starts. In the months after the changes to the rules, the death of Audie Murphy had just as big of an effect on the law. The Murphy and Littleton families quickly moved their civil cases through federal courts. They claimed wrongful death, fraud, and conspiracy. Former employees of the charter company who testified painted a bleak picture of leaders who changed insurance policies behind closed doors, mechanics who lied about safety checks when they were forced to, and shell companies that were set up to hide illegal profits. When judges turned down moves to dismiss, insurance companies had to talk about settlements worth millions of dollars. One big underwriter decided to pay $7.5 million in damages and give half of the money to a fund that helps the families of veterans. Those payments didn't mean they were admitting guilt, but they did show that they understood the human cost of bad papers. At the same time, the Department of Justice started looking into the case again under its insurance theft laws. Even though the deadline for some crimes had passed, prosecutors used newer anti-sabotage rules that were passed in 2015. They asked for records that showed the offshore shell companies' bank accounts and activities. At the end of the investigation, 2 living directors connected to Vander's estate were charged with a rare crime. Even though the suspects were in their 80s, the charges sent a strong message: harm can be done by anyone, no matter their age, status, or time spent in prison. A lot of veterans in the aviation industry praised the DOJ's decision, saying it was important for rebuilding trust in charter services and repair providers. Murphy's family members went public with their grief, turning it into action. Alan Murphy, his nephew, spoke to a congressional committee about aviation security in a meeting that was shown across the country. He calmly and firmly told the story of how his uncle had fought off German Tigers at Holtzweiler but later died because of a cylinder valve that had been tampered with. Because of what he said, lawmakers agreed to give more money for safety checks at rural airports and to make it easier for workers to report problems. A resolution signed by both parties recognized Audie Murphy as a war hero and a leader in bringing about life-saving change. This epitaph connected bravery on the battlefield with alertness during peacetime. The crash spot was given a new name. The hillside with a view of Roanoke used to have a quiet hiking trail marked by rusted wrecks. Now, there is a solemn memorial plaza there. A granite marker with Murphy's honors etched on it sits next to sculpted wings that represent both his time in the military and his last love, flying. On Memorial Day, family members, veterans, and civilian pilots meet to honor him by laying wreaths and reciting the hallowed ceremony of flight safety. They promise to uphold the integrity of maintenance in his name. Pilots in the area say that after arriving at nearby airports, they often take unplanned detours to pay their respects. This can be as simple as a moment of silence or folding their wings in salute. The first annual report from the new Audie Murphy Aviation Safety Commission came out in October 2025. Its main suggestions are digital maintenance logs that must be kept and verified by blockchain, real-time cross-referencing between maintenance records and changes to insurance policies, and an international red flag database for adjustments to aircraft coverage that seem fishy. Within a year, Australia, Canada, and the European Union all passed similar laws. ICAO called an emergency meeting to standardize these procedures. This will make sure that future global charters use the same safety standards. The first sentence of the report, "We owe this progress to the memory of Audie Murphy," showed how the tragic death of one man could lead to improvements in the whole system. The business sector was also inspired by Murphy's story. Big aviation service providers changed the name of their safety programs to be Murphy compliant and started using strict third-party checks. The Murphy Medal was formed by industry groups and is given every year to maintenance teams that do a great job of documenting their work. At trade shows, training workshops now include case study reenactments of the 1971 sabotage, stressing the moral imperative of every bolt, every logbook, every life. Forensic maintenance analysis is taught in universities as a result of the metallurgical tests that found the wrongly installed cylinder in Murphy's plane. Murphy's legacy was also changed by cultural groups. The National Museum of the United States Army opened an interactive exhibit called From Valor to Vigilance. People can look at a virtual cylinder head, spin it to see how the valves are positioned backwards, and test how the engine works in different installation situations. There is a daughter museum at the Smithsonian's National Air and Space Museum that has clips from Murphy's movie career paired with conversations with survivors, mechanics, and family members. These examples are used by teachers to start conversations about the relationship between being heroic and being responsible. They show that being good at one thing doesn't mean you can be careless in another. Audie Murphy's name became famous not only for his bravery in battle, but also for setting a high bar for safety in peacetime. The organizers of air shows started the Murphy Formation, a ceremonial flight of planes from World War II that end each show with a low-altitude pass over repair crews in the bleachers to honor the ground teams that keep the wings in the air. Pilot training now includes sections on making moral choices, using cautionary tales from both historical cases of sabotage and daily maintenance dramas. Murphy's memory lives on in the new generations of aviators who were trained to be brave in battle and to always look out for the lives of those in their care. As the dust settled from lawsuits and new laws, one truth stood out: Audie Murphy's last flight made people realize that the line between hero and victim can be very thin. The bravery he showed on the battlefield that won him the Medal of Honor became linked to the fight for honesty and openness in the United States. By honoring all parts of his life, communities across America reminded us of a basic lesson: the price of courage isn't just in battle, it requires us to always be safe, honest, and respectful of every person's life. Not only has Audie Murphy's story led to changes in regulations and technical safety measures, but it has also caused historians, artists, and teachers to rethink what it means to be heroic and tragic. From the Smithsonian to the National World War II Museum in New Orleans, museums have put together displays that compare Murphy's heroics on the battlefield to the sad story of his last flight. In Washington, D.C., a multimedia installation shows old newsreels of his Medal of Honor ceremony along with forensic pictures of the cylinder heads that were sabotaged. This makes people think about the scary truth that bravery in battle does not protect you from greed at home. The story of Murphy has also been used by schools as a powerful example of ethics and responsibility. A new course at the University of Virginia's Department of History called Heroes and Betrayal looks at the stories of Audie Murphy's bravery on the beaches of Europe and his betrayal by corporations after the war. The story is taught in law schools as a way to get students to write motions for wrongful death damages and fight for made-up appeals based on new evidence. Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University's aviation schools now require cadets to look at the Murphy case and break down how one mistake in maintenance can lead to systemic failure. Hollywood screenwriters and directors have sped up the process of making a limited series that will dramatize the investigation as it happens. The four-part drama, which is likely to be called Final Descent, follows investigative reporter Karen Ellis as she clears up decades of lies, giving viewers a close look at both Murphy's mental state on the battlefield and the personal toll it took on his family. The Murphy estate agreed to help the producers, which allowed them to read private letters in which Audie talked about how flying gave him comfort and how sometimes going back to normal life made him anxious. Insiders in the industry think the show will start a new conversation about how public admiration and private weakness affect each other. Filmmakers who make documentaries have also jumped on the chance. This year, 2 competing projects will be shown for the first time at film festivals. One is by a veteran PBS team, and the other is by a charity called War Veterans Outreach. Both claim to have interviews with NTSB officials who are still alive, transcripts of the grand jury proceedings, and video of Murphy visiting kids at air shows that has never been seen before. The films don't just want to tell the story of what happened, they also want to show how people felt, like how teammates who thought Murphy's life would be easier after the war felt betrayed, and how some mechanics felt guilty knowing they had quietly done what they were told, which sealed his fate. True crime podcasters have also joined the fight, with long shows that break down every link in the chain of lies. In later episodes, people try to figure out how to decode cryptic maintenance shorthand, figure out how wire transfers to offshore accounts work, and look at the tactics Vander's defense team used in court. People argue on fan sites and social media groups about whether the sabotage was murder or negligent homicide and whether the company's actions to meet insurance standards were acts of conspiracy. The anger is similar to what has always been around political crimes or financial frauds. This shows how powerful and important Murphy's last chapter has become. In the meantime, Murphy's acting job has become popular again in the movie business. His lead parts in westerns and war movies, which were once mostly seen as relics of 1950s pop culture, take on a deeper meaning when seen through the lens of his airborne tragedy. Some critics love looking back at old books like To Hell and Back and The Red Badge of Courage, pointing out parts where Murphy's characters are betrayed or have bad leadership. Scholars say that these themes in his movies unintentionally predicted his own betrayal in real life, which adds a touching irony to his work. Audie Murphy's family has had a big hand in making this new story what it is. Terry Murphy Rogers, his daughter, has worked with the National Veterans Foundation to create the Audie Murphy Memorial Scholarship to help the children of military mechanics who want to work in honest repair jobs. Beneficiaries get money to go to approved aviation schools for technical training. This makes sure that the next generation of aircraft technicians keeps the standards that were so badly broken in 1971. In public comments, the Murphy family stresses that honoring their patriarch means keeping others from going through the same thing. Internationally, Murphy's changed legacy has encouraged aviation officials around the world to work together. At a summit put on by the International Civil Aviation Organization, member states talked about how to digitize repair records and keep an eye on insurance policies across borders. The Murphy case was used as an example by delegates from Canada, Australia, and the European Union to push for clear standards. This will create an interoperable system that can spot questionable policy changes and contract transfers. This global network aims to stop shady operators from taking advantage of regulation gaps. This way, Murphy's memory will continue to protect people all over the world, not just in the United States. In small towns and cities, Audie Murphy's name has been taken back as a sign of both bravery and caution. Every year, high school ROTC groups hold field days with two themes: marksmanship drills to honor his military service and mechanical workshops to teach basic engine safety. At small-town air shows, safety talks start with Murphy's last flight as an example of how important it is to do thorough checks and keep records that are easy to understand. After the sabotage scandal came to light, Murphy's biography was read again in veterans' halls to remember fellow veterans that bravery after the war meant more than just getting medals, it also meant being alert to people taking advantage of others. Since the Audie Murphy sabotage scandal changed the rules of flying decades ago, his story is still used to guide fields other than flight. For risk management, corporate boards now issue Murphy protocols that require oversight by a third party whenever top executives give permission for big asset transfers or insurance increases. Companies in the manufacturing, oil and gas, and marine transport industries have written the lessons they learned from the Roanoke sabotage into their governance charters and make honesty a must. Protections for people who report fraud have gotten stronger. Laws now promise anonymity and give money to people who do this. When auditors look at transactions involving offshore accounts in finance, they use the Murphy case as an example and demand transparency similar to the chain of custody changes that were first introduced in aviation. Veterans care groups use Murphy's story as part of their outreach efforts. Every year, the Audie Murphy Foundation holds a Heroes Vigil where military families, safety officials, and business leaders gather to talk about his last flight. Panels talk about the challenges soldiers may face when they leave the military and how to adjust to life as a civilian. The foundation gives scholarships to the children of veterans who want to work in safety-critical areas like medicine, engineering, aviation, and emergency services. In this way, Murphy's sacrifice has turned into a forest of chances for people who want to be guardians in the future. As new generations read Audie Murphy's story, they take with them two lessons: to value bravery in tough situations and honesty in everything. His story shows that you need to be alert and have moral courage along with technical skill. That live tribute is the gift that will last forever. May his skills live on through the ages and help all those who keep people safe.